to contents of EHC plans. Now, before we start this section, in your little goodie bag, you have what I call a bingo card. So you are going to need your bingo card for the next section. And just in case you are wondering, there are prizes. Okay. So, some of you may have had an expect youth play bingo before, some of you may not have done. So the rules are very simple. You have words on your bingo card. If I say the word, you cross it off. First person to say bingo gets a prize. Is everybody clear on the rules? Okay, so you only say bingo once you've not pulled the dwarf, by the way. Okay? Alright. So, I am now going to deal with the contents of the EHC plan. So, as you can see, this can be a very long process. You're in for the long haul, because starting with your request for the statutory assessment, the local authority had 6 weeks within which to make a decision whether to issue a plan or not. They then had to decide whether to issue a plan or not, and it's by week 16 they make that decision. So I'm now going to assume that you lucky people have all now got an EHC plan. Okay? So, you have the EHC plan, and your EHC plan, as some of you will have heard us mention, is in different sections. Now, section A is the views, interests and aspirations of the child and their parents, and it should reflect the exact wording of you and your children, or young people, depending on the age. And this should only be changed through the annual review. Now, in my experience, the local authorities do not ever raise any objections to whatever you want in section A. Section A is generally, if you set out what your child likes doing, what their interests are, what your aspirations are, etc., that will be section A. Now, section A is what we call non-appealable. So there are only certain parts of your EHC plan that are appealable. What is the point of an EHC plan? Some of you may wonder. The point of an EHC plan is it's meant to be a small document that anybody, let's just say a locum teacher comes into the classroom and they've got Jemima puddled up in their class. Jemima has an EHC plan. An EHC plan is meant to be a document that they can look at quickly and they can see what those needs are, and they can see what provision should be made. So it might be that, for example, that young person needs everything broken down into simple language, and any lesson delivered should be in small chunks. But the idea of the EHC plan is that anybody who is working with that child can see at a glance. That was the idea. The other point of an EHC plan, and why you want one, is section F should give provision for your child, and that the EHC plan is a statutory document, and if the local authority do not make the provision in section F, you can bring judicial review proceedings. So it's a statutory document which the local authority must provide. That's the point of you having it. Because there's no point having the document if it's not legally enforceable. Because schools and colleges, particularly mainstream schools and colleges, may well say to you, we can look after Jemima, she can make progress. I once dealt with a child many years ago who had been through primary school, and the parent consulted me, and lots of alarm bells were ringing about how she described the child. She consulted me because she was worried about transport to secondary school, nothing else, transport. But everything she described, I thought was something I thought, and I diagnosed with no medical qualifications that child had a genetic disorder known as Prader-Willi. and that child should have had an EHCP years ago. The thing with this child was, it sat at the back, it made no cause, it was very quiet, made no progress, but caused no fuss. So I was absolutely pretty much ignored in mainstream school. So you need to, the purpose of an EHCP is it identifies needs and you've got provision that you can enforce if you need to. Section E, outcomes. Parents often get concerned about outcomes and can spend a lot of time arguing over outcomes. It's not appealable, but it is important in this way, because how many times have I seen an EHCP for a young person, let's just say they're age 14 now, and the outcomes are identical to when they were 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 and 14. They are the same. And so you know that that child has made no progress because the outcomes haven't changed. So really, if a child's making progress, you want to see the outcomes changing from year to year, don't you? Because otherwise, what is the point? And if the outcomes are still the same and the child's not making the outcomes, then I think you'd be saying there's something wrong. This child needs more support, don't they? They must need more support. They must need something else. If they're not making, it could be they need a change of school. But they need more provision. So outcomes are important, but they're not appealable, okay? And I often, if I'm dealing with a case where, say, a parent now wants a specialist placement, I will go back the last 5, maybe longer annual reviews, and I want to see, have outcomes changed? Has this child made progress? Section J is a personal budget. And often it sort of ties in with Section F, so I'm not going to dwell on that. Section K is really important because it has all your reports and documents. The first thing I ask for from a local authority is, can you send me a copy of the EHCP and all the K documents? And what local authorities sometimes do is the parents have had an independent report, and that's then not included in the K documents. It should be there. Section B, now we are, and really important, Section B is important. You have to have all of the needs described. And as Celine said, your child doesn't necessarily need to be behind its peer group in order to get the EHCP. Because there are various headings to the needs. Communication and interaction, and just because your child can talk, doesn't mean they don't have communication and interaction problems if they have social communication difficulties. If you have a child or young person who really struggles with social communication, then they have difficulties under social and communication, don't they? Cognition and learning, I've already mentioned. Your child or young person may have difficulties under cognition and learning. Social, emotional, and mental health. We have a lot of young people at the moment, particularly post-COVID, who have struggled going back to school with social, emotional, and mental health difficulties. Sensory and or physical. I have dealt with a number of cases where the young person may, for example, have physical difficulties, so maybe in a wheelchair, and yet the local authority initially may have refused an EHCP. Similar for somebody who's blind or deaf, they've also refused initially EHCPs. But that obviously comes under sensory and physical. But if a child or young person has sensory and physical difficulties, they often have social, emotional, mental health because they are struggling to deal with their disability. Not always, but don't think just because the child is deaf or is in a is in a wheelchair for some of the time or all of the time that they won't have other issues. Okay. We may, depending on the age of the young person, you might be looking at self-help and independence. That's important. Strengths. The local authority is slightly obsessive about strengths. I know it's tribunals are never interested in it, and it can be useful to have a small section on strengths, but I wouldn't dwell on that. Section F. Section F. Now, this is the really, really important bit. Now, I've given you some words to go home with your glass of wine tonight. The next one that you've got to take home is quantified and specified. If it's not quantified and specified, it is utterly useless. I have never, in over 30 years, yet met, or seen rather, an EHCP on initial draft that is lawful in the sense that it is quantified and specified. The first draft from any local authority, and I will give them a box of chocolates, should I ever see one, is always vague and useless. Because saying that Jemima Puddle Duck may require is useless. The other one is Jemima may benefit from. I would like you all to know I may benefit from a Caribbean cruise. It doesn't mean to say I need it. There may be some who think I need one, but the point is, may benefit from is utterly useless. So may benefit from, access to. What does access to mean? Does that mean, what does it mean? Nothing. So when you're looking at, for all of those who already have an EHCP, go home tonight, again with your glass of wine, and just go through that section F. Is it quantified and specified? Is it really that? Is it worth the paper it's written on? Okay. It needs to say the frequency and the duration with which something's going to be provided. So let's give an example. Speech and language therapy. So Jemima may benefit from the input from a speech and language therapist. Meaningless, useless. What it needs to say is Jemima needs speech and language. Did I say speech and language therapy? I did, didn't I? Yes. Speech and language therapy from a qualified and experienced speech and language therapist for a minimum of 40 minutes direct, one-to-one per week. In addition, they need 10 minutes or 15 minutes giving programs to the NSA who's going to give it for the rest of the week, something like that. That is quantified, that is specified. You know what your child is going to get. Now the other thing is LSA support. Jemima will have access to LSA support. Who knows what that means? Nothing. It means meaningless. What it needs to say is Jemima will needs one-to-one support for so many hours per week. This is when you get into arguments with local authorities and schools. Because schools will tell you, let's just say full-time support is 30 hours, but they need to, they may be modifying materials prior to the lessons. So when are they meant to do that? And some LSAs who are not paid valuable, not well paid in many local areas, say, well, I have to do it during my lunch break, and then I haven't even got time to go to the toilet. So there needs to be built into the HCP. Jemima needs one-to-one support for 35 hours a week. So there's a flexibility that the LSA is going to have time to do materials. If that's what's needed, if the young person doesn't need modification of materials, then that extra time may not be needed. But does Jemima need one-to-one support in the playground? That would need to be built into the LSA support as well. The other thing that schools and local authorities do, which again you need to keep your eye on, if your child or young person has 15 hours of one-to-one support, how do you know they're getting the 15 hours? It's really impossible because there aren't cameras in the classroom and you're not flying a ball and you can't sit at the back of the classroom. You need to keep your eye on it because what happens in many schools, unfortunately, is that the teacher and the school think, oh, well, the LSA can be used for the other kids in the classroom, which is wrong. If your young person has 15 hours, 20 hours, whatever it is of LSA support, then that should be for your young person. Yes, the local authority will often say, well, we don't want them to have the one-to-one support Velcro to them. That word Velcro, that's a 1980s word, isn't it? Who has Velcro anymore? Nonsense. But also, nobody wants the child to become reliant on the one-to-one support, but any competent one-to-one support is going to be able to back off when necessary and allow that young person then to do the task themselves. So I'm just mentioning one-to-one support.
Can I just ask, should the one-to-one support be trained in a specific area of your child, like have specific autism, VI?
Should the one-to-one support be trained in a specific? You can ask for that, and certainly if the matter was appealed, a tribunal may well say that anyone could have a provision in it. Anyone working with Jemima should be trained and have experience in working with children and young people with a diagnosis of autism or with a diagnosis of a hearing impairment, if the child has a hearing impairment, because or has training and experience of working with young people with a visual impairment, because with all of those, autism is a classic one really, but you can ask for that. You might get it, you might not get it. In order to get the specification about training, you probably need some evidence that, you know, that the young person, Jemima, we'll call her, for want of a better name, needs that, and that it can't just be somebody off the street. So you might want that from, for example, an experienced educational psychologist providing a good and detailed report is likely to say if the LSA working with them should be trained. So I think it varies case to case, but that's helpful to have that in. No doubt it's very helpful to have that in. If you're occupational therapy, a child or young person with a diagnosis of autism, I've said it before, is likely to have sensory issues. So occupational therapy, I would want to see that quantified and specified in there. I would want to see one-to-one, probably once a week. Again, you're going to have that from a therapist. So I'm going to give you, I am hammering home the point about quantifying and specifying, because it's so important to everything that your child or young person needs from the EHCP. So, for example, Emily may benefit from small group or one-to-one phonics sessions. I've already mentioned that, may benefit. I benefit from the Caribbean cruise. Although I wouldn't like to be cooped up with all those people for that length of time, personally. So, but anyway, you get the point. May benefit, useless. So if that's in your EHCP, over the weekend or Monday morning, you're going to be saying to local authority, actually, have you looked at my EHCP? Or you can raise it at the next annual review. If you've got an annual review coming up, it's something you can raise, okay? The speech and language therapist should devise a programme for school staff to deliver, to be reviewed on a termly basis. This is another example of completely useless provision, okay? Because this speech and language therapist is going to devise a programme. Well, the EHCP should say what the programme is. And it's going to be reviewed. You have an annual review if you have an EHCP. Saying the speech and language therapist programme is going to be reviewed is useless. You shouldn't have that, okay? You want to know what the young person is going to get. Emily may require additional adult supported lessons. What does that mean? Who knows? Useless, again. So is everybody getting the point? All of these are taken from real life EHCPs and all of them are hopeless. All of them need to be challenged. For those that don't yet have your EHCP, when you get it, you're going to be so on the ball. You get that draft, remember, 15 days to comment. You're going to be remembering what I said and you're going to be saying, no, we need it quantified and specified. Yes? Everybody with me? Emily should have regular access to a small group motor skills programme for one term and then be reassessed to determine if a further term of input is necessary. How useless is that? It just is flowery language meaning absolutely nothing. Because could get nothing, frankly, could they? It doesn't mean anything. Regular access. What does regular access mean? Is regular once a day, once a week, once a month? Who knows? So, I've done section F. I know that one of the questions earlier on was, what if the local authority, EHCP, provides a report that has nothing that's quantified or specified? It's a very good question. So we come back to the EHCP, the educational psychologist is employed by the local authority. So they're not independent, and they are getting, firstly there's a shortage of them, which we've already mentioned, and secondly, they seem to be coming under pressure to write flowery reports, which say and do very little. So I think that if you have an EHC report from an educational psychologist who's a local authority educational psychologist, you need to go back to them and say, well, I've received a report, but what provisions, what quantified and specified provision are you suggesting? Because that needs to be, we need to have that in the HCP. So go back to them. And if you can afford it, this is where an independent educational psychologist report can come in handy, because an independent educational psychologist will give you a much more detailed report about needs, will carry out all of what we call baseline assessments, so all of the cognitive assessments, reading assessments, comprehension assessments, and will very much deal with, in the report, will also set out quantified and specified provision. Now, independent educational psychologists are also difficult to come by these days because there's a shortage of them. Some local authorities are employing independent educational psychologists to carry out reports. That is fun, folks. That is fun because they're still doing the reports they would do on an independent basis, and they're not succumbing to the pressure of the local authority. So that's quite interesting. But the educational psychologist reports, and I'm not doing a sales pitch for independent educational psychologists because of quite a number that we've recommended over the years have all recently retired, and there is a shortage of independent ones, but they can be helpful. If you are at the start of a journey, or you're wanting a specialist placement, then if you can afford an independent educational psychologist, they can be helpful because it gives you the baseline of where your child is at, and you can go from there, and also they'll set out the provision. Now, that leads us to, I think, we're then going to go on to section I. You're still playing bingo, remember? Everyone got their bingo cards? You've got your pens ready? Because we're slightly ahead, what we're going to do is we're going to pause, cover up your bingo cards. You don't want someone looking over your shoulder. We're going to pause now and have a short break, and then we will return to section I. I think that's a good place to pause, section